In the center of the planet, there sleeps the great Earth Dragon, a being of incomprehensible might. So immense is his power that even his dreams change the world, granting special individuals on the surface extraordinary powers beyond those of mortal men. This is the Earth of the Mirage universe, and you're listening to the Mirage Barrage. Why do aliens always look so much like humans? In pop culture, that is. Of course, there's an obvious answer, which is that it's a lot easier to do makeup and costumes for aliens roughly in our shape. It also can be because if they look a bit like us, we can identify facial features and read body language. A truly alien would be totally foreign to us, and we wouldn't know what would be signs of aggression or fear or peace. But there may be some plausible explanation of why aliens might look like us in reality. It isn't terribly unusual to see life forms evolve in roughly similar shapes, and that's because, well, evolution. Given the limitations of what biological organisms can do, what environments they're in, and what their survival strategies are, including hunting and mating, there is a most optimal form. Well, there might actually be several equally optimal forms, but they'd probably all meet the needs I just described. An ambush predator, for example, will likely develop camouflage, and certain environments will be better for ambush predators. Depending on their diet, different teeth or beaks will evolve. The ability to sprint will require a certain development of the legs, etc., etc. So it could be that the two-legged, two-armed, two-eyed model just happens to be the basic optimal shape for intelligent life forms. Maybe the reason humans have intelligence is that we just aren't that special in other respects. Many animals are faster, many have keener senses of smell, some can fly, and it would seem that many are better natural hunters. Perhaps it is because we are so unremarkable in all these ways that we had to rely on our brains to evolve. So maybe we should expect similarly unexceptional beings to also be intelligent. Or maybe that's all blind speculation. Whether or not there's a shred of truth to this idea, it is not the reason Ashfelians look so human. Even with everything I mentioned taken into account, we should expect some noticeable differences that clearly distinguish aliens. Maybe they have fur, maybe they're reptilian, maybe they don't have distinct nose and mouth, or other of their facial features are arranged differently. Whatever the case, we should be surprised if we found aliens that looked just like us. And as it turns out, Ashfelians don't. Not at first. Ashfelians are a mystery to the galaxy. They aren't unheard of, but they're rare enough. Perhaps fewer than 100 are known throughout the galaxy, and their impressive biology makes many skeptical as to whether their origin was entirely natural. Ashfelians begin life. Well, we actually don't know how they begin life, but when Ashfelians, who are scattered throughout the cosmos, fall to a planet, they are little more than an indistinct blob. They are thickly armored, otherwise they couldn't survive the atmospheric re-entry, but they quickly shed this carapace and appear as little more than blobs. From there, they have an instinct to hide and observe. Eventually, they will come across the dominant life form of the planet, and as they follow them in secret, mold themselves to that shape. The copying process is not always entirely accurate, and many Ashfelians have distinguishing characteristics that seem unnatural, such as Greta's snow-white hair. They also rarely recreate the internal organs of that species accurately, and no one is quite sure how they go about observing and changing anyway. But once they assume the shape of the dominant species, they remain in that state. They aren't eternal shapeshifters. They change into one form, and then appear much like every other member of that species, often fitting right in, even psychologically. Ashfelians aren't aware of their time before they take on a form, just as humans don't remember their time as babies. So, to many, they are that species, just with extra powers, which seems to be an innate trait to all Ashfelians. That said, they don't lose 100% of their previous shape-shifting ability. They retain just enough that with practice and much concentration, they can ever so slightly change their faces, sometimes their skin tone, sometimes their hair. Almost always, they can only change it to one other face. But If they ever want to walk around in public without being recognized, it becomes a very helpful tool. And that's all the Allrosses ever used this ability for. While their identities were public knowledge, Captain Cosmos had started heroing before it was required to turn his information to the government, and had used this power to make a secret identity for himself. The others, who came in after the restrictions were put in place, merely used it to get out and experience the world as normal people, something Jack had encouraged. He thought it was very important that they see what life was like for everyone else. Of course, they didn't make this power known, as it would defeat the purpose. Worse, many of them feared that people would become suspicious and fearful of the Ashvelians if they did find out. And it seems they had a good basis for that fear. As Greta had just discovered, Karma had somehow learned of this ability, and her reaction was to try and kill them. The two were on the coast of North Africa, miles away from any settlement, handcuffed together by a high-tech device from Griffin Industries, Karma unconscious due to a massive electrical pulse that had knocked her out for days. And in her dazed state, she had muttered the real reason that she had fired a xenosite bullet into Greta's head, permanently altering her powers, because she had seen one of them change faces. It wasn't until evening that Karma regained full consciousness. It wasn't all at once, but slowly, fading in and out, so that by the time she was fully awake, she hardly remembered half of the time she had been waking up. She just knew that she had been struggling for consciousness for an hour or two, and it was quite easy for her well-trained eye to see that something was wrong with Greta. The two had never really gotten along, obviously, but this was different. "Well, what are you going to do?" she finally asked after a half-hour of awkward near silence. "About what?" "You're clearly considering something. Figured that out, did you? You don't even know what happened, do you?" "Not really." "You were talking." Karma tensed ever so slightly, but didn't let it show in her face. "Was I reciting my greatest hits?" she asked casually. "No," Greta replied flatly. "No, you mentioned seeing something. Something that led to a botched hit." She pointed to her forehead. "Ah," Karma replied. She looked elsewhere as Greta kept staring her down. This was truly the trickiest part. Any sane person would surely realize at this point that it was best to do away with Karma. Her only hope was that Greta's idealism wasn't particularly sane. "So, what are you going to do?" "That's it? That's all you have to say?" "What were you expecting? Apparently I said everything that I needed to." Greta exploded. "You coy little lying hypocrite! You pretend to be so refined and sophisticated, but the truth is you are a petty, pompous prima donna who can't handle if anyone is even slightly like yourself. You are so sad that if anyone gets close to copying your powers, you begin crying that you're obsolete, because in reality, no matter what else you do, you are just a scared, pathetic little girl leaning on your powers, because if anything scratched beneath your painted face, there would be nothing there." Karma rose carefully. "Careful, Miss Allross. I get it. This karma shtick you have is just a justification, isn't it? You don't actually have the guts to shake the boat or stake yourself to any claim, but heaven forbid you reveal to everyone how shallow you really are. So you come up with this nonsense anti-code to justify working for the highest bidder where you'll be safe, because that's all you really care about, yourself, keeping yourself safe and pretending you're something more than just an empty black hole." Karma leaped onto Greta, knocking her down by sheer surprise, and tried to claw at her face, but Greta simply raised her arms and held her back. "You want to lecture me, little girl?" Karma spat. "Every word you speak is nothing but classic projection, you clumsy simpleton. Anyone just looking at your stupid branded trademark costume can see an empty shell of a stupid little girl who clung on to Daddy for everything resembling an identity. You couldn't justify half of what your so-called father believed in, because you're just a sad little puppy following around his dead ideals. Newsflash, you asinine clown. He's dead because of his irrelevant philosophical tripe. Because you can't save anyone when you're dead. He was nothing but a self-important, pseudo-humble marketing tool for a corrupt, failing government without enough brain cells to accomplish half of his potential. So say thank you, Karma, because now I've made you just like him." Greta shot upwards, hurling Karma and then slamming her down into the sand. And again she slammed her into the ground. She let go of one of her arms to wind up for a punch straight at her face, but when Karma's head came up, it was Sylvia's face. Greta was taken aback for a split second, just enough time for Karma to launch herself back at her and dig one of her claws into the bandage over Greta's still healing wound. Greta screamed in pain, but Karma just kept digging deeper, as if she thought she could reach the xenocyte bullet and push it in far enough to finish the job. For Greta's part, her vision was exploding with spots, and the rest of her sentence seemed to be drowned out in pain. She could hardly think, much less fight back. But with the pain, there was also boiling hot anger, which she focused to a point. She threw Karma off of her, down to the ground, and put her foot against Karma's right wrist, and then, with all of her strength, she pulled and pulled. Now Karma screamed in pain until the handcuff finally snapped in two, though it wasn't the only snapping sound that filled the air. Karma gasped in pain, her left arm moving gently towards her shattered right. Her face was nothing but shock and pain, until she turned back to Greta, and then there was horror in her eyes. "Say thank you, Greta," she hissed. "Because of my father's dead ideals, I still haven't killed you." Karma gulped in air, tears of pain in the corner of her eyes. "You wanted to make a deal before? So here's a new one. I'll let you get out of my sight, so long as my and my sibling's secret doesn't get out into the world. There's your new status quo to defend, because if anyone ever hears about it, I'll know who to find." "Really? You don't push me, Karma. You can't really expect me to just vanish. It's what you're good at, right? Griffin is going to hunt me down after all of this, to make sure I don't talk. If you send me off now, it's basically murder. Then I'll have something to bring him in on." Karma smiled falteringly, her eyes still wide and watering. "You've been hanging around me too long. That's kind of what I'm saying." No. Wait, please," Karma said on her knees. I need help. I have to take out Anton before he gets to me." "You mentioned." I can do it, but I need your help." "You little snake." "We can get past the security." "You wanted us to stay stuck together, so you could use me to get to Anton, didn't you?" "What choice did I have?" "Testify." "You know that's a death sentence." "Then it really looks like you're at the end of the road, doesn't it?" "Please," Karma sobbed, throwing herself at Greta's feet. "You were right. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die." Greta stared at the pathetic display for several seconds. "One condition." Karma looked up, grasping at Greta's top. "Name it. Anything." "You confess to the attempted murder on my life, and you rot in prison. If we take out Anton, if we try, you get one shot, one plan, and however it turns out, you confess. You go away." Greta could almost see the gears turning in Karma's head, just as Karma surely saw the absolutely resolute expression on Greta's. This was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. "Yes," Karma croaked. "I agree." It wasn't hard to find civilization shortly after. Following the sea, they eventually found a town. From there, they procured clothes and supplies just as soon as Karma was able to access a computer and a bank, transferring some of her illicit funds when Greta refused to simply steal what they needed. Karma had quickly adopted a disguise, blending into the native population. Greta was more conspicuous and instead tried to hide behind a veil. In the cheap lemon of a car that they had bought, the two rode silently, Karma driving. Greta was keeping a loose eye on the criminal. Karma had already revealed that she needed the other super, and so any attempt at escape from Greta would only stymie her cause. Karma had barely said anything since they began their new journey together. She had mentioned needing to see some people who could help, but little else. Greta didn't push. She wasn't sure that she had fully settled on her course of action, but as she ran through it in her mind, she felt more and more sure that it was the right option. Still, she couldn't silence all of her doubts. "You should change," Karma finally said on the long road between Algerian cities. "There's not going to be a much better disguise around," Greta replied. "I meant your face." Greta looked at the other woman. Karma's obvious discomfort and strict attention to the road told her that she was serious. "Why?" was all Greta asked. "The people we're going to see, they wouldn't take kindly to anyone affiliated with the government. Criminals? Technically." Greta waited. "Go on." Karma hesitated. You don't want me going in blind, Greta said. Let's call them a resistance. Against the Algerian government. Against the power. That phrase sounded vaguely familiar. I don't work with the Algerians, Greta said. I know. They know. But mistrust of power comes with the territory. And the power, le pouvoir, Karma pronounced the French fluently, probably more fluently than the narrator could, is just what it sounds like. They are the true rulers of the nation. Elected officials are nothing compared to them. The military and civilian décideurs make the real decisions, even choose the president. And so the resistance opposes them. It's quite a small group. If supers hadn't been banned in the country, it might not have even formed. Many of its members care less about the politics than in being able to walk the streets freely. Is that why you know who these are? Because they fight for supers? Or is it because you tried to take them out? Karma's eyes flicked toward Greta. A brief flash of something, indignation, hurt, scorched out from them. You said you were all about the status quo. It doesn't matter. Karma, Greta said warningly. Karma sighed. I worked with them. An exception to your rules? This was before my rules, as I was just beginning. I heard of their cause, and in my naivety I thought it was something worth pursuing. I learned better and moved on. Something changed you there. I just gained experience. I don't believe you. That's your choice. You're going to tell me the full story. I already have, Karma insisted, though it was hardly convincing. Greta opened the car door. Guess I'm walking then. She hadn't moved from her seat, but Karma's head swung around, and now her eyes were truly burning, pouring out hot anger. She swerved the car to the side and skidded to a stop at the side of the road. Greta didn't move. What's the game here, Greta? She hissed. I agreed to your deal. I didn't agree to spilling my guts out to you. Greta didn't answer. She thought for a moment, trying to put the words just into place. Karma continued to stare daggers at her. I'm trying to decide, Greta finally said. Decide what? Whether you really think so alien to humanity, or if there's human motives behind what you say and what you do. Karma chuckled twice, utterly without mirth. Don't pretend to sympathize with us. Greta raised an eyebrow. You really expect me to believe you came to this status quo power ideology by yourself? With no prompting, no revelation, no dramatic event? I may be an alien, but I've yet to meet someone who really thinks like that. I've seen people rationalize selfishness and convince themselves that atrocities are for the good of the world, but they talk like crusaders or pilgrims. When you talk, it's like you're calculating and detached, with no love for yourself or for others, and not even a real hatred. Except when you talk to me. Guess I'm just more layered than you're used to, Karma replied dryly. Something happened while you were in the Resistance. I want to know what it is. We have more important things to do than indulge in childish curiosity. Okay, Greta replied simply. She stepped out of the still open door, got out, and closed it behind her. She stood leaning on the car, looking towards the horizon, as Karma sat behind the wheel, stewing in her thoughts and distilled fury. Even as an hour passed, Greta continued to stand impassively. Karma made no move either. As the sky started to change color, Karma opened the door and got out as well. She also leaned against the car, her back towards Greta. The two stood there, both against the car, on the side of an empty road for several minutes. Le soulèvement was a joke, Karma broke the silence. Their leaders were well-read, and to an impressionable young French girl looking to save the world, starting by making up for the sins of her nation, they seemed like the ideal heroes. Even if she saw the rough brutality of some of their followers, their cause was just, and their zeal could be forgiven. Even after the first time they slaughtered some low-level government officials, it was easy for her to believe the rationalizations the leaders offered post-mortem. They were part of the system, and this was a necessary display of resistance. Even if they were just there to earn a wage, they were part of the government. And even when she heard the glory-drunk proclamations from the murderers that they had done it to teach them a lesson about respecting their betters, their superior, powered citizens, she could pretend it meant something else entirely. Even as her faith was breaking, She refused to let the cause die in her heart. It was her duty to believe in the cause. Otherwise, what was she doing? So when she found out that the leadership was working with le pouvoir to draw out, control, and even sell out those looking for justice, she didn't simply accept that the cause was dead. No. Instead, she would gather those fighters who still believed. Who she believed. They would usurp the traitors and renew the fight for justice. Imagine her horror when they instead used this as an excuse to do what they had always wanted, to rampage the streets and openly defy all, taking all they wanted, be it material or human, with no regard for any higher ideal. Sitting in a prison cell, having been betrayed by all, she might even be lucky enough to have a visit from a décideur, one who could explain to her the benefit of control and how it led to peace. Conflict is inevitable, but instability is not. And when she had so clearly seen the error of her actions, she might even realize that everything she had believed was a childish fairy tale, that even the sins that she sought to correct were not so black and white after all. For even through bloodshed, civilization and prosperity arose. The truth, if she were smart she'd realize, was that there was no good and evil. There was only power, and the closest thing to justice we will ever see is stability. And so, she may even aid le pouvoir and the faux resistance in ending the barbarians she unleashed. Le pouvoir would claim they put down a threat, and le soulèvement would claim that it was truly they who had cleansed their movement of radicals in order to further the true revolution. And as everything returned to normal, the girl, now a woman, would set off on a new life, looking out first for herself, and if she could, for stability second. Greta stayed silent for a while, processing more than what Karma had said aloud. Karma turned towards Greta for the first time. "Will you change your face now?" she asked. The knot in Greta's stomach tightened. It was only fair. Karma had finally revealed her secrets, and Greta had no right to keep her own. Maybe that made her nothing but a naive girl. Greta wasn't that sure anymore, but she decided, at least once more, she would indulge the same impulses that led her to putting on a faded bow. When she turned back to Karma after several minutes, her skin was a little paler, her one eye a lighter blue, and her features all around softer. Her hair had even turned a shade of dirty blonde. Karma could still see a little of the other Greta in her, she thought, but maybe that was only because she knew who it was. As she blinked, the face did seem more and more different, even as her brain insisted it knew who it belonged to. Greta and Karma got back in the car, shut their doors, and drove off. They didn't exchange another word during their trip, both lost in thought. Greta couldn't help but think back to what she had heard, but that Karma hadn't said. What had affected her most were the rampaging supers. While Karma had been open about her shift in political views, she had left out the other change that Greta suspected had come over her after this event. She suspected, practically knew, that ever after seeing the raw power unleashed by rogue supers, she had developed a deep mistrust, even fear, of those more powerful than herself. And perhaps this fear had grown even more from the fact that Karma thought she understood them, only to have her true ignorance revealed to her when she saw an Ashvelian change face. Like all too many other fears, Karma's stemmed, perhaps, from the fear of the unknown. They spent little time at the headquarters of Les Soulèvements. Karma was welcomed back as a returning comrade, though some of the greetings were chillier than others. Greta's appearance didn't cause much of a commotion, as Karma vouched for her. Karma quickly explained how she was about to launch an attack against Griffin Industries with the help of her new, powered friend. She only needed a few supplies and confirmation of where Anton was. This was provided easily enough in exchange for some more funding from Karma. Les Soulèvements could not just give away resources, they explained, and it was all the same to Karma. Soon enough, they were ready. Anton Griffin is not a man to take security lightly. On approach to his compound outside of Cartagena, Spain, he maintained a radar station to detect anyone approaching. Additionally, he made sure to have several spotters and a generous perimeter fence well outside the compound proper, which ensured a long, empty space one would have to travel through in order to get to his facility. Anton also maintained a close relationship between this facility and the military port, ensuring that he could easily call in backup if necessary. Sneaking in under the radar wasn't difficult. All it required was to stay on foot. However, this left Karma and Greta more than visible to the mini-sentries. While impersonating a visitor seemed to be the obvious route to take given Karma's powers, there were too many complications. To boil it down, visitors would be kept under strict watch, so while they might get within the compound, their movement would be restricted, so they might as well have never penetrated the defenses at all. But Karma had assured Greta hiding in plain sight was almost always the key. Step 1 was the guard tower on the perimeter wall. The wall was at least 20 feet high, and the tower higher still. This would be the most difficult of the guards to subdue. Even in the still of the night, the whistle from Karma's dart was nearly inaudible. Once again proving her marksmanship, she struck a small patch of skin visible under his mask, and he quickly slumped. His partner, it was best practice to have guards work in pairs, fell shortly thereafter. The 2 highly accurate rapid succession shots were no mean feat, but still were just the beginning of the challenge. Greta, waiting just underneath the guard tower, barely heard the whistle of one of the darts, and didn't wait to hear a second. In a carefully controlled burst, she launched herself upward. Had the guards been conscious, they surely would have noticed the sudden dispersal of dirt beneath their tower. Instead, Greta grabbed the ledge of the tower and swung herself in expertly. She wasted no time, approaching one of the unconscious guards and examining his wrist carefully. When she found the tiny bump, she took a small black pill from her bag and opened the guard's mouth. Clamping his jaw shut as Karma had shown her, she forced the man to swallow, and then counted to 5. On 5, she let the smallest beam from her eye escape and pierce the small bump on the man's wrist. When she could smell the scent of burning electronics, she wrapped up the wound and moved on to the second guard, repeating the process. By the time Greta had hopped back down from the tower, Karma had made her way to its base. Without stopping to exchange notes, Greta grabbed a hold of the assassin and once more leaped up into the guard tower. Unfolding a dark-colored cloth with her good hand, Karma strapped it to Greta's belt, boots, and back before climbing onto her back as well. The cloth mimicked the color of the interior of the wall, and while far from perfect camouflage, should be enough to hide them from any quick glances. Greta hopped down into the compound, hiding behind the sheet, and waiting for the last moment before gently letting out a small shockwave from her foot, just enough to slightly cushion the blow with the ground. They weren't worried about the sound, that wouldn't carry far, so the landing was more rough than strictly necessary, but as planned, Greta absorbed most of the impact. Once on the ground, they started their slow concealed crawl towards the gate. Greta's instinct had been to avoid the guard station at the gate and instead pick a spot further out. Karma disagreed, explaining that being closer to the gate would actually make it easier to hide from the line of sight of the guards. Close in, they had more cover, for instance, and if the plan went right, the guard would be a little relaxed when it was time to make their move. So the 2 snuck up to the guardhouse, staying low and very close. Greta felt distressingly exposed as they had folded up the cloth. While they both wore dark outfits and face paint to blend into the night, Greta couldn't help but feel like they were just out in the open. But by the time a truck came in for deliveries, no alarm had been raised. Just as the guard cleared the truck and it started to move, the 2 tensed. They rolled quickly and grabbed onto the vehicle's undercarriage. Karma strained with the effort of keeping herself above the dirt trail, especially with only one good arm. It was much easier for Greta, and she couldn't do anything but watch the strain on her companion's face. At about halfway to the compound proper, Karma nodded. Greta carefully released one hand from the undercarriage and pointed it downwards, towards the center of the trailer. She let out the slightest of concussive blasts, just light enough that it wouldn't glow brightly, and kicked up some dirt. A few seconds later, and she did it again. Then she started to create a trail of pluming dirt. No doubt the guards at the compound would be wondering what was up. At about 3/4 of the way there, she let loose with a major dust cloud, throwing the concussive beam back and forth for maximum effect. And then she stopped for a few seconds. Karma nodded again. One more burst of dust and the 2 released. They didn't hesitate in rolling over to the grass while the dust was still in the air, and Karma whipped out a tarp of mock grass that she quickly threw over them. They watched out of a thin slit as the truck made its way to the entrance of the compound, and as they predicted, it was quickly stopped and guards came out to ask questions. Greta had already spotted their next objective and signaled with a single finger to Karma. She was already on it. 2 guards on a nearby roof were quickly tranquilized. Then Karma flipped a switch on what looked to be a cigarette lighter. An electrical flash from underneath the truck short-circuited the little device she had left behind and did its trick of getting the attention of all of the guards. As one shouted at the driver and the others circled the vehicle, the two infiltrators took their next risk. Slipping out from the tarp, Greta leaped up to the roof and landed gently next to the two guards. Without missing a beat, she and Karma, who had clung once more to her back, inserted the pills, and then Greta disabled the microchips. Anton Griffin was very careful. Even if it was slightly illegal, he had all of his guards implanted with microchips that monitored and transmitted their vitals, as well as their location via GPS. Anton's paranoia was such that even a resting heartbeat or other vitals that indicated sleep could set off an alarm if they continued in that state for too long, so not even tranquilizers would be sufficient to avoid detection. Karma didn't seem to find this much of an obstacle, however, having acquired these pill devices from contacts in the Algerian resistance. They would begin transmitting vitals and GPS signals once they acquired the nearest signal, which they would then emulate. A rather impressive piece of technology. Greta thought Karma must have gone through quite some trouble to acquire them. Whatever she may claim, Greta didn't believe the resistance simply had them at hand. Of course, this trick couldn't be used on everyone. Guards with patrol routes couldn't be taken out this way. It would quickly become obvious that they had stopped moving, and an alarm would sound. But now that they were entering the compound proper, it wouldn't matter anyway. They waited until the head of security asked for everyone to check in. Karma, donning the face and voice of the passed-out guard, gave the all-clear signal on their end, and then they proceeded. The inside of the compound was, generally, even more tightly guarded than the outside, but Karma had a plan for this too. She had found an obscure objective, something very few would have accounted for, that could be gotten to relatively easily. Relatively. It took a little disguising on Karma's part and some sneaking from Greta before they got into the elevator shaft. But once there, they faced their main challenge. "I don't see anything," Greta said, barely a whisper. "That's the point," Karma breathed back. "It would be too easy to get by if you could see them." She handed Greta a small telescope-like device. "Give me a second," she said. The easy thing to do would be to just ride the elevator up, but without authorized access, that too could set off an alarm. So they'd have to climb, and they'd have to avoid the invisible crisscrossing lines in the air above them. A patchwork of infrared laser transmitters and receivers would signal if anything passed through their little beams that shouldn't, like Greta and Karma, for instance. Karma's plan for this? To give the receptors a laser beam from somewhere else. "Found one," she whispered. Greta carefully walked over and saw the little, nearly invisible receiver. Karma pointed across the shaft, and sure enough, there was the little laser emitter. If they accidentally stepped in front of it, the laser wouldn't reach the receiver, which would sound an alarm. Holding the telescope to her eye, Greta started to emit her own laser. She kept it on a low power, and supposedly the telescope shifted the frequency into the infrared. Carefully, very carefully, she started to step to the side, keeping her eye glued on the receiver the entire time, and when she was finally staring directly into it, nothing happened. No alarm sounded. "Good. Let's hurry," Karma said. It was painstaking. Karma had to carefully identify each transmitter and receiver, and then they had to position themselves so that Greta could take down one, only one at a time, and let Karma set up clamps for climbing. If they missed a single one, or swung to the side too far, or simply miscalculated, it would all be over. Concentrating was one of the most difficult parts for Greta. Holding herself up on the elevator cables as they went wasn't too bad, until they got to a beam that was pointed almost directly across the elevator cable itself. The cable was held taut, so it wasn't swinging side to side, but there was no way Greta could climb past it while maintaining the right angle to the receiver. At some point, as she climbed upwards, her body or legs would block the beam, and her head would be too high to get enough of the beam into the receptor. Karma figured out a solution for this, and Greta hated it. Keeping her gaze steadily focused on the receptor, she allowed Karma to wrap a rope around her legs and carefully pull them up, while Greta still clung on with her hands to the cable. Slowly, Karma manipulating her carefully, she brought her legs above her head until she was hanging upside down. As the blood rushed to her head, Her arms started to quiver with the effort of supporting herself, and it was becoming harder and harder not to look away. It was nearly impossible not to blink. And then they were up. They were at the top of the shaft, and Greta cut a small hole to the night air outside. Karma carefully crawled out of the hole like a spider, having several safety tethers attached to the inside of her elevator shaft. She maneuvered herself to the metal plate of an air circulation unit on the side of the building. Greta climbed out next. She wasn't as gentle as Karma, instead punching hand and footholds into the building so she could climb around. As Karma set up her rifle on the side of the air unit, balancing it so that she could fire one-handed, Greta used her beams once more to weld them into place, and then to weld the last safety harnesses onto the outside of the building. This skyward perch was in a blind spot from the guards, and naturally, no one cared, as just a moment before it was just a random wall several dozen feet up in the air. But it did provide a vantage point, through a window and a glass elevator shaft, to a corner of Anton's office. It was an impossible shot by all sane measures, but Karma was supremely confident that she could make it, so long as one last obstacle was taken care of. With Karma secured, Greta prepared to jump. One last nod from Karma, and she soared outward. The radar wouldn't detect her. They were under the maximum height of the building, so radar wasn't aimed here, and it would have to be a very crazy guard to be looking into the middle of the sky in the middle of the compound for just the right second to see Greta leap from one building to the next. She made it, and quickly found her way to the top of the glass elevator's shaft. Summoning it to another floor would raise attention, and Karma wanted the maximum possible time for her shot. So they came up with an only slightly less suspicious plan to get it out of the way of the shot. Greta found a small cable on top of the car, peered down at it, and let out another laser beam. Slowly, ever so slowly, she let it eat away until the cord snapped. The elevator fell about a foot before the emergency systems caught it. A warning bell chimed softly, and, as per protocol, the elevator gently descended down to ground level so that maintenance could have a look at it. And now they were set. Karma was ready in her perch, the glass elevator no longer obstructing her shot. Just several sets of glass stood in her way now. Greta crawled back up to the roof and looked over towards the small office window which supposedly contained Anton Griffin. It would certainly be a cruel twist of fate if they had gone through all of this and he wouldn't be where they wanted. No, there he was. Even at this distance, Greta recognized the face, the receding hairline, the glasses on the tip of his nose, and the sunken eyes. Anton Griffin was here, and if he'd moved just a little to the right... Bang! Glass shattered throughout the compound in a split second. Even expecting it, it took a moment for Greta's brain to realize that a supersonic bullet from Karma's gun had been responsible. Her heart racing a million beats a minute, she looked back towards the office. Anton was lying on the ground. Greta's stomach twisted up. Somehow, it hadn't seemed real until... Anton stood up. Greta blinked several times in surprise. It couldn't be. Even now, as her brain was catching up with the sudden events, she was sure, positive, that she had seen Anton's head impacted by the bullet. In a sideways thought more appropriate to a dream, Greta's brain couldn't help wonder if it was ironic that this was the second headshot from Karma that didn't kill her target. But that thought was quickly pushed away as Greta saw what was really happening. Half of Anton's face was sagging off of his already prominent skull. Except it wasn't a skull. It was a gleaming silvery color, now with a large dent in it. The robot turned around and removed the last of the synthetic flesh. And just as Greta was getting a handle on the situation once more, she was hit with another shock. Barely visible from this distance, she could just see a hammer and sickle in the center of the robot's forehead. What is the meaning of this robot doppelganger? Will Greta and Karma be able to escape now that their plot has failed? What will become of the former hero and the overly confident assassin? All this and more in the finale of Child of the Stars, Woman of the World. Next time on the Mirage Barrage.